Quantum leaders, the diplomat, applying the principle of quantum consciousness, oscillation between strong and weak forces. The diplomat's natural style, relational, empathetic, and attuned to emotional currents, positions them as the bridge between people, perspectives, and potential conflict. They create cohesion where there is fragmentation and understanding where there is resistance. Yet, under the quantum principle of oscillation between strong and weak forces, the diplomat's relational brilliance is not only in keeping peace, but in dynamically navigating between emotional strength and receptive softness, between assertion and allowance, truth-telling and tact. Their power is not in being nice. It's in knowing when to hold the line and when to soften it. With a motivation direction of towards, the diplomat is motivated by unity, connection, and shared solutions. The strong force shows up in their clarity of intention, to bring people together, mediate effectively, and foster trust. But when overused, this desire can become over-accommodation, masking of truth, or loss of boundaries. The weak force invites them to pause, receive, and allow emotional truth, even if it's uncomfortable. When they oscillate between purposeful harmony and vulnerable presence, they stop smoothing over conflict and start transforming it. Their attention focus on others allows them to read emotional nuance and relational energy. The strong force here is emotional intelligence. They sense needs, soothe tension, and adapt communication in real time. But the weak force is self-trust. If they orient too much around others, they lose clarity on what they feel, believe, or need. When the diplomat oscillates between tuning outward and checking inward, their empathy becomes anchored, not performative, but truth-aligned. With an external frame of reference, the diplomat listens to others before acting. The strong force here is social awareness, but when unbalanced, it leads to self-silencing or emotional code switching. The weak force invites internal authority, grounding their harmonizing skill in personal conviction. When they oscillate between absorbing feedback and standing in what feels right, they shift from mediator to relational leader, one who doesn't just resolve conflict, but elevates the room. Their options-based operational style gives them fluidity in how they handle situations. The strong force is adaptability, always finding a win-win, but over-applied, it leads to people-pleasing and diffused focus. The weak force is clarity. Sometimes a clear no, a firm boundary, or a single path forward is what the system needs. When the diplomat learns to oscillate between exploring options and committing to direction, their flexibility becomes leadership. Their general viewpoint helps them navigate nuance and context rather than rigid details. The strong force allows them to hold complexity with compassion, but the weak force brings them into specificity. What are we actually agreeing to? What does this resolution require of each party? By oscillating between the big picture and tangible impact, the diplomat helps systems not only feel better, but function better. With a proximity work preference, they thrive in shared spaces. The strong force here is connection, collaboration, and emotional presence. But the weak force is withdrawal, stepping back to regain clarity, center the self, and reattune. When the diplomat oscillates between togetherness and strategic separation, they prevent emotional burnout and bring cleaner energy into every interaction. Their emotional engagement is associated. They feel what others feel. The strong force is empathic resonance, but the weak force is detachment. If they stay immersed too long, they lose perspective. When they oscillate into emotional neutrality, even briefly, they access clearer perception, sharper boundaries, and more effective timing. This balance makes their compassion sustainable. As matchers, they seek alignment with shared values. The strong force brings loyalty to what's worked before, but the weak force invites innovation, asking, is this still the right way? Is this still fair for everyone now? When the diplomat oscillates between honoring the past and challenging the outdated, they lead systems into evolved harmony, not just comfort. Their through-time orientation gives them patience and an understanding of emotional process. The strong force is holding space, but the weak force is sensing when the moment for resolution has arrived. When they act too early, they bypass. When they wait too long, tension calcifies. Oscillating between presence and pivot allows them to initiate the right conversation at the right time. And with the primary drive of people, they're driven by meaningful connection. The strong force expresses in relationship building, repair, and mutual support. But the weak force reminds them that sometimes space is the medicine. When the diplomat oscillates between showing up and letting go, their presence becomes healing, not just helpful. In this quantum rhythm of relational strength and receptive pause, the diplomat becomes more than a peacekeeper. They become a relational recalibrator, moving with exquisite timing between empathy and direction, attunement and truth, compassion and clarity. Their leadership doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from feeling the field and adjusting its emotional geometry. Harmony is no longer their goal. It becomes their method. Quantum leaders, the diplomatic equilibrium as nature's core design. The diplomat's natural style, attuned, inclusive, and emotionally intelligent, naturally seeks to preserve peace and facilitate understanding. They are the emotional barometers of systems, intuitively sensing discord before it erupts. Yet through the lens of dynamic equilibrium, the diplomat's stabilizing force evolves. Harmony is not static. It is a balance point constantly shifting between expression and restraint, connection and differentiation, empathy and assertion. The diplomat becomes most powerful when they stop striving to eliminate tension and instead learn to hold it with skill. With a motivation direction of towards, the diplomat moves to foster unity and connection. The polarity here is unification versus individuation. Too much emphasis on harmony may cause them to lose their authentic voice. Too much individuation fractures the field they're meant to bridge. Their power emerges when they oscillate, helping others feel seen without disappearing themselves. This balance creates a relational space where differences coexist without dividing. Their attention focus on others gives them the ability to perceive emotions, energy, and interpersonal shifts before others are even aware. The polarity is empathy versus boundary. If they merge too deeply, they lose discernment. If they wall off, connection suffers. The diplomat thrives when they center themselves first, then extend attunement. This equilibrium allows them to care without overcarrying. With an external frame of reference, they rely on feedback and responsiveness to social dynamics. The polarity here is adaptability versus clarity. When over-adapted, they shapeshift to the point of incoherence. When overly fixed, they lose relational finesse. Dynamic equilibrium empowers them to listen fully, then respond from their own truth. Their leadership emerges when they are informed by others but not defined by them. Their options-based operational style offers flexibility in communication and problem-solving. The polarity is possibility versus precision. Too many options create diffusion. Too few limit fairness. The mature diplomat narrows choices after exploring the emotional terrain. They give voice to the field, then guide it toward focused resolution. Flexibility becomes functional. Their general viewpoint lets them sense themes and emotional undercurrents, but equilibrium requires they ground those themes into action. The polarity is feeling versus function. The diplomat matures when they translate empathy into agreements, conversations into decisions, and intentions into commitments. Emotional fluency becomes strategic architecture. With a proximity work preference, they flourish in connection. The polarity is presence versus self-preservation. Too much presence drains their energy. Too much retreat weakens their relational influence. When they honor their energetic cycles, leaning in when aligned, stepping back when saturated, they remain clear and effective. Their presence becomes a renewable force rather than a diminishing one. Their emotional engagement is associated. They feel others' feelings almost as their own. The polarity is immersion versus observance. Emotional resonance becomes problematic when they absorb too much. But when they toggle into witness mode, feeling with, not through, they gain clarity, timing, and power. Empathy transforms into leadership presence. As matchers, they seek to align with shared values and proven resolutions. The polarity here is tradition versus evolution. Relying too heavily on familiar conflict resolution methods may stall growth. Pushing too hard for innovation may unravel trust. The diplomat evolves when they gently stretch norms, inviting new dynamics without destabilizing the old ones. Their through-time orientation gives them an intuitive sense of emotional timing and process flow. The polarity is patience versus initiative. Waiting too long to name tension creates stagnation. Moving too soon risks bypass. The diplomat becomes quantum when they sense, now is the time. not by schedule, but by resonance. They don't force change. They facilitate its readiness. And with a primary drive of people, they are devoted to cohesion and shared experience. But the polarity is group coherence versus self-integrity. If they only serve the group, they erode their own clarity. If they serve only themselves, they lose influence. The diplomat becomes most potent when they honor both, upholding their truth within the collective, not in opposition to it. In this space of dynamic equilibrium, the diplomat emerges as more than a harmonizer. They become a relational engineer, balancing emotional transparency with discernment, compassion with clarity, and responsiveness with rootedness. They stop trying to remove all friction and instead learn to orchestrate it into progress. Peace becomes something they no longer protect. It becomes something they build moment by moment in motion. Quantum leaders, the diplomat, observer effect, and the collapse of possibility. The diplomat's natural style, emotionally intelligent, connection-driven, and tuned to group dynamics, positions them as a subtle but central force in every relational field. But through the quantum principle of the observer effect, their role becomes even more powerful. What the diplomat notices, expects, or holds silently within begins to shape the system itself. Their attention doesn't just interpret the emotional atmosphere, it influences it. Their belief about how people will behave often becomes the script they unconsciously hand to the room. Harmony or tension, inclusion or exclusion, forward motion or stalemate, all begin to coalesce around what the diplomat is observing, even before they speak. With a motivation direction of towards, the diplomat seeks connection, trust, and shared understanding. But if they observe too closely for signs of disconnection or misalignment, they may start reinforcing it. Looking for potential relational failure, or anticipating it, can collapse otherwise neutral dynamics into guarded behavior. Yet, when they choose to observe for emerging connection, curiosity, or courage, they tip the relational field toward trust. What they expect to find in others is what they help surface. Their attention focus on others gives them a highly sensitive radar. But if they constantly scan for emotional disturbance, tension, or disappointment, the field mirrors back unease. The diplomat's awareness becomes a tuning fork. When they observe others as capable, emotionally available, or ready to engage, they are far more likely to become that way. Their attention is not passive. It is priming the social environment. With an external frame of reference, the diplomat responds to signals from the group. But quantum systems respond to the observer's posture, not just their interpretation. If they observe themselves as a background supporter rather than a voice of clarity, others will unconsciously follow that lead. But when they hold themselves as a necessary contributor, as someone whose presence already shapes the tone, their influence expands. They stop waiting to be invited in. They realize they're already setting the tone. Their options-based operational style gives them range, but how they observe choice affects what opens. If they expect tension from naming hard truths, people will resist. If they observe space for honesty, nuance, or repair, people soften. The diplomat who observes emotional safety helps create it. Possibility collapses around what they quietly expect will be tolerated. Their general viewpoint enables them to hold multiple truths. But if they observe the field as too complex or fragile to hold confrontation, they may unintentionally freeze resolution. When they shift to observing the system as emotionally intelligent and resilient, the group becomes braver. Their faith in relational capacity becomes a self-fulfilling structure. With a proximity work preference, they sense everything: tone, body language, pacing. But their unspoken interpretation carries weight. If they observe disengagement, they may start adapting or withdrawing, subtly affirming that something's off. But when they choose to observe beneath the behavior, holding curiosity instead of judgment, they shift outcomes. Their silence is not neutral. Their presence is instruction. Their emotional engagement is associated. They feel with others. But this observation of emotion also shapes the emotional tone. If they view intense feeling as dangerous, they signal for people to suppress it. If they observe emotion as information, others relax and reveal. Their attunement is not just perception, it's permission. They can collapse vulnerability or expand it, depending on how they see it. As matchers, they align with what's worked in the past. But the observer effect warns, If they only see people through historical behavior, he always shuts down, she never listens, they recreate the past. When they shift to observing who someone is becoming, the system shifts too. They become catalysts of relational evolution, not by pushing, but by witnessing potential into presence. Their through-time orientation allows for patient sequencing of emotional process. But if they expect conversations to go poorly or relationships to degrade, they unconsciously begin preparing for it, thus accelerating the very outcome they hope to avoid. When they observe the process as unfolding, repairable, and evolving, they collapse the timeline toward resolution. Their pacing becomes the system's readiness. And with a primary drive of people, they're deeply invested in connection. But if they carry the unspoken belief that they must manage the emotional tone alone, they subtly communicate imbalance. When they observe people as co-regulators, as responsible, open, and willing, the field tips toward shared stewardship. The emotional weight distributes. The group matures. In this lens, the diplomat is not simply managing relationships. They are shaping relational architecture through their awareness. Their observation becomes invitation. Their gaze becomes design. What they believe is possible in others becomes more probable. Their silence creates space, their attention creates direction, and their presence collapses the field into connection. They don't just witness peace, they initiate it by seeing it first.